What's up, guys? Tim Halston with DragBoss Garage. Welcome back to the channel. Man, this is going to be a live chat that's going to be unbelievable. Now, I guess I should really clarify it as a podcast. I had to actually look up the definition to see the difference between a live chat versus a podcast. But the way it worked out, you're going to be able to hear both of us. I might have to talk louder because the way the phone is set up. So please bear with me for that if you see why I'm talking loud. But I want to give some shout outs to my family, Mrs. DragBoss, Elena, and Izzy, the Bossettes. If you saw some of the stuff I put down, Elena helped me do the brakes on my truck this week. So thank you, Elena. But she wrote me this letter, and she wanted me to read this letter. It says, "Dear my little car worker, I hope you finish your car so we can go racing. Love, Elena. P.S. You're the best car person ever." So I read that. That really, thank you, Elena, for that. I appreciate that. We'll set it up there. I also got some things in the mail that I want to thank my buddy, John Fiamengo. He had the Pro Stock Mustang that he had built and had to sell for his family to flourish. He sent me a box of Ford goodies. He worked for a Ford Motor Company in the service department for quite a long time, and sent me some thermostat housings, a bunch of little clutch bushings and stuff, since we're doing Mrs. DragBoss's Mustang. So these are very hard to find items. He also sent me a seal, front cover seal, and these little felt type gaskets. Actually, they're rubber that go on the back. And he said it helps hold the seal in the back, if I'm not mistaken. I also want to give a shout out to my friend Larry Berry. We call him the Shoe because he's that good of a driver. He sent me this book, Ford, The Dust and Glory. So a lot of historical information in there. So tonight what we have is going to be a live chat. It's going to be quite unbelievable. Now I can see the camera's out of focus, so don't worry about that because all we care about is what we're going to talk about. So if you're here last week, I had on Larry Wallace, and we had a great talk with him. Actually, the guest knows him quite well. And I want to give you guys a shout out for being there for me and liking and subscribing. I appreciate that. And also the super chats that you guys sent. I appreciate that. It all goes back into the channel so we can build these cars. So who's here now? We have about 26 people already. We got Perry Ford, Ed Case, good to see you. Bill Fioretti, good to see you. Greg from Australia, The Shed. Ramon Tubbs, hey guys. Daniel Wilson, it's good to see you too. Kind of bummed about this focus, but I don't care. We're going to listen to this in the garage, and that's the advantage of a podcast. You don't need to sit here moving my hands around. You can just listen. Hey, Mike G. So with no further ado, I want to welcome one of the pioneers in cylinder heads, intake manifolds, flow dynamics, Don Losito from Ultra Pro Machine. Don, welcome to DragBoss Garage.
Thank you. Good to be with you, Tim.
Nice. I'm glad you're here. Very glad you're here. A big shout out goes to a mutual friend of ours, Mike Lancy. See, Mike emailed me, and I said this before when I had talked with Larry, and he said, "Listen, I got these guys that I think would be good to be on your show. They have great history, and I know that's what you're trying to do is record the history." And I said, "Okay, who are they?" And he gave me a list of numbers, and you were on the list. So I ended up calling you one day, and we hit it off and just started talking. And I'm telling you, you and I get talking, it's hard to get us off the phone. I mean, we've spent hours on the phone. So you've taught me a lot, gave me a lot of insight. Now, Don, how did you get to be the king of, cylinder heads? How did your story start? Were you into cars as a kid? Tell me about it.
Well, it looks like it started when I was 5 because my mother took a picture of me underneath a pedal car that I had.
Okay.
What kind you sit in and pedal with your feet. My grandfather was a carpenter, so there was a lot of wood around, and I must have put it up on block, and I was underneath it working on it, doing something to it at 5 years old. And then I had a paper route when I was, 12 to 14, and I saved the money. You didn't get much money back then, and I bought a 1955 Chevy two-door sedan, 265 V8 3-speed.
Okay.
And then I bought a 47 Ford Coupe with paper route money and used to work on those cars. And my Uncle Byron used to help me, and he taught me a lot. And that's how it really started. And then I was fortunate in high school. There was a vocational school, which you don't, have today, unfortunately. Right. But we had 3-hour blocks where you were in that class and for 3 hours, and we worked on cars, we worked on engines. I mean, it was the full deal. It was amazing. And I did that my junior and senior year of high school. And then I started college, and they offered a setup where I could go to the same school for 3-hour blocks, and I took machining. And I ran a tracer lathe, and back then that was a big deal. You'd make a stylus of what you wanted to make on the lathe, and it would profile it. And then we had a Bridgeport tape mill where you would. It was so long ago I can't remember exactly how it worked, but you would actually be able to program, and that was the first CNC type machines, and we're talking 60s here, 1960s. I did that stuff, and that was really helped me a lot. Discipline and how to do things right, and we totally rebuilt engines. My first engine was a V8 flathead Ford that I rebuilt in school. Okay. And after that, I got other cars, and I built a 327 Chevy, aluminum rods, and I ground on the heads. I didn't know what I was doing back then, but just started playing around. And so much of it is learning by doing. That's how I just learned by doing things.
But did you have a mentor? Who was your mentor?
Pardon me?
Who was your mentor? I mean, you learn by doing things, but did someone guide you?
No, my mother was divorced.
Okay.
And my father, I was born in Cincinnati, and he lived there. And when I was 8 years old, we moved out to Phoenix, Arizona. And so I did not really have a mentor.
Okay.
My grandfather, possibly, he built houses, so I used to hang out with him. But no, other than my Uncle Byron, he knew cars. He was a plumber. But no, it was just learning by doing. I actually put a lawnmower type engine on a little red wagon when I was about 10 years old, and put a belt pulley on the axle, and it actually ran. I'm surprised I didn't kill myself, but that was a lot of fun. I remember that well. But yeah, just doing things. I think that's the key to people's success. You just got to try, and if you fail, you start over and do it again. I think that's the key to life.
Wow, that's a fact. You can't be afraid to fail. Learn from that mistake and don't do it again.
Right. If you're afraid, you won't go anywhere. I mean, the engines I built, IndyCar, NASCAR. I mean, you're at the racetrack, you're watching them run, and you have to have nerves of steel to be in that league, or you're gonna have a heart attack. Because it is stressful, but you can't let it get to you. You just got to relax and just say, okay, there she goes. You know, Indy was the most fun I've probably ever had. I mean, I used to be able to stand, and when they were practicing, between pit lane, there was about a 3-4 foot gap before the racetrack. And I stood there with a radar gun. Those cars going by me at 240 miles an hour. The Buick V6 we built, they would run 240, and Rick Mears would run 240, and some of the Penske cars, the rest were, in the 230s down the straightaway. And then when they go in, they don't lift in for qualifying. If you lift, you lose. That was the motto.
There it is.
And I remember working with Scott Brayton on the Buick V6. We had Rick Crawford. He qualified third, which was a big deal, front row.
Wow.
That was the Mac Tools car of Kenny Bernstein's. And then Scott Brayton, he qualified. It was either fifth or sixth, so that was really good. And that was for the first year for electronic fuel injection and the low deck engine.
Now we're talking
12 engines,
correct?
And it was the best one was Jim Crawford's carburation day. Well, he had wrecked the car. The carburation day, something was wrong with the gear shift. He went first, second, third, second, and he kept going, but it tagged the valves. I leaked it down afterwards, which I always did, and saw it. And that engine made 899.9 horsepower. I would never cheat the boost. The Buick could have 55 inches a boost, and I'd never cheat the boost on the dyno. It would have been easy to make 900, just tweak the boost a little, but 55 inches of mercury you were allowed. The Cosworth, which I built that year too, that same year in '89, they were about 750 horsepower, 45 inches of mercury boost.
Wow.
And they ran on methanol, straight methanol. I got ahead of myself.
I know.
It just was, the Indy is so cool.
Let me just ask you.
Go ahead.
So you're telling me that what you're talking about on the Indy, I've heard of Cosworth engines, but you're telling me a Buick V6 turbocharged was running on Indy.
Oh yeah.
55
push rod boost. Yeah. Yeah. We could spend the whole 2 hours talking about that. Yeah, we would turn them. We're talking 1989.
Yeah.
So we turned them 9,400. No, excuse me. 10,400. I'm sorry. Wow. 10,400. We ran a 314 rear end gear.
Okay.
And the Chevys ran that year. The Elmore Chevy. They could run a 440 gear. And that helped a lot on if you got in traffic. They had that 440 gear, and we could only run a 314 gear because our RPM, they would turn 14,000. It's a 4-cam overhead cam engine like the Cosworth. It's all gear drive on those engines. And then they have a torsion bar shock absorber system in the center gear. These little tiny torsion bars are, I can't remember how many, but, close to 20. And they absorb the shock of the gear train. And, that's part of the British technology that they put into that engine.
Okay.
Well, we're getting way ahead of ourselves of what I did before this, but one more thing about the Buick. When I started working on that, and I was actually working for Kenny Bernstein,
okay,
the drag racer.
Yep.
And the Buick had never finished a race. they didn't know how to keep water in it. And by me being a Cosworth engine builder, and plus, I built dirt late models, drag race engines of all kinds, sprint cars, midgets, going back to the 70s. I figured out how to keep water in them. And this may sound crazy, but to seal the compression, use the sealing ring that went into the head about 50 thousandths and went into the block about 50 thousandths and had about 4 thousandths crust. And what I did, they were just trying to do it with a Velcro gasket and use that ring. And they didn't have O-rings. The engineers didn't put O-rings in this deal.
Oh, okay.
Which, for the water. So what would happen, the head would lift and the compression would go right into the water. And the dyno had a clear glass. So the first engine we did, it was just bubbling, something terrible. And I know, well, this isn't going to work. So I looked at it, and what I did, we were already cutting out the sealing area of the Velcro gasket, the blue Velcro,
and
it had steel.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
The fire ring, you mean?
Well, we took the fire ring out of it. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
You're breaking up a little bit.
Okay.
Okay. Took the fire ring out of the gasket and bored it oversized so it would go around that sealing ring that is in the block and the head.
Yeah.
And then the Velcro gasket, that blue is actually removable. So what I did, I took I had a carbide tip precision scraper, and I cut a groove on the exhaust side, 2 grooves at each cylinder. And so what happened when the head would lift under boost, and they still made a ton of power even though it did that. The exhaust gaskets would go out that trough I made in the Velcro gasket. And then the rest of the gasket sealed the water. Where before, when it would lift, it would just blow all the exhaust gases, or compression into the water jacket and start percolating things. So it worked. Something that simple. But by me building Cosworths and then going to the Buick, I knew that because they O-ringed the block, and they actually knew that was going to happen through all their testing, and they had troughs machined in the block. So the compression, because you get into situations with these engines, on road courses, etc., where you get slowed down, you can lug them, or if they're in the wrong gear, and they'll just fail, and the head will lift. And that's why they drag racing engines, because of that. They'll just, if they run water in the head, they don't let it go through the block. So that's just a lesson for everybody out there. I got ahead of myself on my career,
That's okay.
But it was just, I thought it'd be interesting.
Why didn't Buick figure this out? I mean, what were those engineers doing?
Why didn't they?
Yeah.
Well, they went to school. What do they know?
Got it.
You know what I'm saying?
Hell yeah, I know what
They
you're
don't
saying.
teach. They don't teach that stuff.
Yes.
Here's another funny story.
Okay.
I was in the garage, in Scott Brayton's garage at Indy, and talking to the head engineer. I mean, the guy over everything at Buick. And we were talking, good conversation. Smokey Yunick comes up. Oh my goodness. And he starts talking to me, and, I was telling him about the engines and everything. And he's looked at that Buick engineer right in the eye and he said, "You remember me? You came to me a couple of years ago and wanted this thing fixed. And I told you it cost you $250,000 and you turned me down. How much have you spent? 20 million?" Oh, it was funny. Of course, I couldn't laugh. But can you imagine? That engineer just hung his head. He didn't say a word because it
was right.
Because Smokey would have figured it out, but nobody figured it out except this old guy. Well, I wasn't old then, right. 89, but I was about 40 years old. But it's unbelievable how all those engineers and they could never figure out how to keep water in the darn thing. And, such a simple fix. Because I wanted to O-ring it, but we didn't have any time, obviously.
Yeah.
We had to build 12 inches for Indy, and we didn't get blocks till February. That was tough because of all the testing you do.
What was Smokey like?
Oh, he was great. Just so down to earth and just really fun to talk to. And
was he cocky?
During this IndyCar deal, I met Zora Duntov. He came into the engine shop, and I talked to him quite a bit. Wow, this is cool. Zora Duntov, come on. I used to use the Duntov cams back in my early days. They called it the Duntov 3030 and the Duntov 1218. Those were two cams, and they were called that. And that was the valve lash. That was just the name they were given, but they worked real good. Flat tappet cams back in those days. Zora, they hired him just to look around. Buick hired him.
Yeah.
And but it was cool to talk to him about valve train, etc. Then let's go back.
Oh yeah.
We got ahead of ourselves. But this is prior to me doing the D3 head.
Yeah. Okay.
But what I did, out of college, I got in the service station business of all things. I had 3 sales stations, and then Mobile wanted me to come to them, and ended up getting a mobile station. And then these kids that were in high school would come by and kind of hang out and talk to me, and their teacher quit, and they actually had a vocational school, and they talked me into meeting, with the principal and the superintendent, and I got hired, and I kept the mobile station.
Okay.
And I taught 3-hour blocks of vocational automotive. I mean, I had a Sun and Rod hone. We hand honed the blocks. We did everything. Valve jobs, guides. It was pretty amazing. And I taught them how to work on cars too.
Okay.
It was a full deal. I taught juniors for 3 hours and then seniors for 3 hours. That's the way it worked.
Wow.
And then, I was off all summer. That gave me time to build engines and race. Plus, I had a race car there. At the shop, I had a dirt late model car. I built a 454 for, okay. And the kids kind of enjoyed that. But after that, it kind of all developed. I kept building engines, dirt late model, and then I started through my life. I always kept good credit, so I was able to get financed on some equipment. The first CK10, believe it or not, was $10,000. That was in the probably the mid 70s, excuse me, mid 1970s, $10,000, and Son and financed it.
Okay.
It was $152 a month. That's amazing,
Wow.
isn't it? When you think about what a machine like that costs today. And then I bought a Son and line hone to line hone the mains.
Yeah.
And then I bought a Storm Vulcan wet grinder to do the heads and blocks. And the reason I went with that is because I was using the Donovan aluminum block, and of course you have ductile iron cylinders.
Okay.
And the Storm Vulcan head surfacer with the cutters, it would just tear it up. You know, it would just leave you a bad finish. And that wet grinder was just unbelievable. Nobody really uses those today, but man, I'm thankful for that. My blocks were perfect, and it was an amazing machine. I also bought a Rottler F2B cylinder bore machine. Everything in that row, the salesman called it Cadillac row. I had them all in one line, and everything was about $10,000 back then. And the Rottler F2B was, you know, it had the floating head for the boring bar. It was the full big machine back then. Not like what you can buy today, but, you know, really good. So I had that, and I built Midget engines. And back then it was you either ran a Volkswagen or a Chevy 2. The Chevy 2 was a 4-cylinder, iron block, iron head, and, you know, I'd port the heads and you know, build the engines. My main customer was a farmer, Wayne Weiler. He had a cotton farm, and he would dyno it with his tractor dyno. It was funny to watch, but it worked. You know, they ran on, you know, it was fuel injected alcohol.
Okay.
And boy, they would run. We would, the stock stroke, as I remember, was 3.5 inches. And it was about a 4-inch bore engine. Yeah, it was a 4-inch bore engine. Yeah. And we would have the crank offset welded and then offset ground. Yep. And the first one we made a 3 5/8 stroke. Then we got braver, went to a 3 3/4 stroke. And then we did a super welded up crank, a 4-inch stroke. So it was 4x4, 4-inch bore, 4-inch stroke, 200 cubic inches, 4-cylinder. And man, those engines would run. Leland McSpadden, who was a real good sprint car driver and midget driver back then, yep. He drove that thing. And at Ascot in California, Wayne was really smart. The track went dry slick. I mean, black, you know, just a black track, totally rubbered up. He put slicks on that midget and just annihilated the field at one race. It's kind of funny, wow. You know, on a dirt race, yeah. You run slicks. But, you know, that's what it is, learning by doing. He had never done it before. But, you know, that's how you win. You might lose, but you'll learn from it. You know, you just got to be brave. That's a perfect example of it. But, you know, he'd run that midget at PIR on the mile track, and man, those midget guys, they're brave. You know, it's amazing. You know, JJ Yaley, the NASCAR driver. Okay. I used to do work for his dad. Oh God, why can't I think of his name? Got to get a drink here. I'm getting dry talking too much.
What's up, Mike Lampley?
Yeah, his dad was great. He great racer, and he actually assembled his own engines. I just, you know, would do machine work for him. But and after I, you just get to start knowing people. I was building all kind of engines, drag race engines, sand drags. I built a blown Chevy alcohol engine for the sand drags. It was actually a funny car, and boy, that was pretty cool to do. And then I built an injected small block for a guy that had this tiny little rail type sand drag car, the Tasmanian Devil. And that thing was violent. I mean, he would hit it, and sometimes it just launch off the ground 3 feet, and then he would be all sideways, and I don't know. He was crazy. But just I built all kind of engines, and it was fun. It's hard, because of inventory. It's hard to stock anything, but you just do it, But I probably built more dirt late models and sprint cars than anything. A good friend of mine, Gary Stanton, back then he built his own sprint cars, and he had the best sprint car in the country, and used to build his engines. And now Gary's one of the best engine builders in the country. And it's funny how that evolved. He used to watch me do ring end gap and stuff like that. And he's a great guy. Really like Gary. He's about my age. And
now, how old are you, Don?
I'll be 76 December 19th, and I still work.
Damn.
Still working. So, and I guess I'll work till I die.
Me too.
And that's the plan anyway.
Yep.
Because I think that'll keep me young if I just hung out, which I could if I wanted to. I'm debt free as far as that goes, and I got, but which is important. I've been debt free for since 2017. I've been debt free, and I've bought $4 million worth of equipment. We haven't got to Ultra Pro machining yet,
I know.
Yeah, or any of the other stuff, but that's kind of how it all progressed, and then I started building IndyCar engines for the Machinists Union. It's the full name is International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers. Well, they had their own IndyCar, and back then they were trying to run a stock block Chevy, which was legal. It was fuel injected, around 360 cubic inches on alcohol, methanol, and so I built those, and it was quite a neat engine. We had Cosworth oil pumps on the side, and they were driven by a belt drive in the front, and aluminum block, aluminum heads. I hand ported the heads, did all the machine work, and we ran those for a little while, and then and back then they had a flat bottom car with no aerodynamics. They were behind the times because the Penske cars, were, ground effects, and we weren't. So, but we ran the last race at Ontario, the big 2.5 mile Ontario track, and they used to single car qualify Indy cars back then. This was, late 70s, maybe 1980.
Okay.
And you if you were in the pits, in pit lane, you would lose the sound of the engine of the car. That's how big that track was. I say was because it's no longer. they tore it down for, growth.
Sure.
But they had a drag strip there, everything. That was a wonderful facility. It's a shame. But that was, the Chevy just didn't make any sense. Push rod engine, we're talking 1980, 79.
Yeah.
We didn't have the technology. And now Dan Gurney, he qualified on the pole with a Chevrolet, but they couldn't keep it cool. They knew it wasn't going to finish. That would have been, around that time, which, that's fantastic for him. But they just kept looking at the air inlet and the radiators, and I looked at it and it's just going to fail, and it did. It's a shame, but because it was fast. And then eventually the Chevy pushrod engine, 350 style, got grandfathered out. You had to keep running it, and if you wanted to use it. Now, if you could just use that engine on the road course with all the torque,
yes,
compared to a Cosworth, other than what would hurt you, we'll get into something right now that's, I think, real important to the racer out there to understand.
Okay.
You got to look at wheel torque. On every engine you do, or every race car, or every gear ratio you put in the transmission, the wheel torque at that time that that you're going to be using it at that time, and that's engine torque times the gear ratio in your transmission times your rear end. Now, just to let you know, if you would change tire diameter or circumference, that's going to change everything to where you have to start over. But that gives you a baseline, because everybody knows you put it in first gear, man, I got acceleration.
Right.
If you took off in high gear, the engine would stall out.
Right.
Well, that's wheel torque. Getting that torque to the rear wheels. That's why in a road course, they downshift and they put that exact gear ratio in the transmission they need. Formula One is, probably the biggest example of that, the ability they have to do that. It's just worth so much. And then, like a drag racer, getting the right first gear to launch, and then whatever gears thereafter, to where the engine doesn't get below an RPM range that it can't, pull out of it. And plus, then you don't want to get into a lug mode in an engine, then it messes up your tuning, and that's when you start lifting ring lands off of pistons. Okay. So that's just a little wheel torque lesson there that I've been through, all my career, learning by doing. And it's a big deal.
So let me
that's
clarify
the first thing you want to look at.
So let me clarify that. So it's engine torque times the transmission gear, the first gear, times the rear end gear.
Okay. That gives you the number.
Yep.
And as you multiply it down into fourth gear, the number gets lower. So the lower the number, the less torque you have to work with.
Okay.
So that's how that works. And tire circumference, you don't really need to worry about that, only if you change diameter or circumference of the tire. Then it changes everything, and you got to look at it again. So I hope I explained that good for everybody. But it's a big deal to look at anytime you build any kind of even a street car. So, okay, where were we? Let's see.
So we were talking about you're talking about the Indy cars with Chevy going out with a 350.
Oh yeah, yeah. And then the Machinists Union actually traded one of the Chevys I built to Bill Tempero. He was, you know, a low budget guy, but he that engine picked him up 12 miles an hour at Indianapolis. So I was pretty proud of that.
Damn.
And then I moved from Phoenix, Arizona, where I had the Thunder. It was called Thunder Racing engines. I had. Then we moved to Brownsburg, Indiana. You know, near the drag strip, actually, and right around the corner from the Colts training center. I lived in Eagle Creek, but it was Brownsburg, and real close to, you know, the gasoline alley. That's where the engine shop was that I worked at, right across the street from Indianapolis Motor Speedway. It's called Gasoline Alley because of all the shops that the teams had in there.
Yes.
And I worked for Mike Fanning, who built engines for the Machinist Union. So I sold all my equipment. You know, I got out of it because the Machinist Union liked me, liked what I did. And, you know, Andy Kanapensky, who was in charge of it, he wanted me to move. So I moved. And I really enjoyed building the Cosworths. It's quite interesting, you know, when it's a gear drive and it's a 4-cam, you know, on each side, one cam's going one direction, the other cam's going the other direction. So you really got to have your act together when you degree the cams, because you got to degree all 4 of them in, and you don't want to mess up. And everything is O-ring in that engine, in the Cosworth V8. Okay. There is not one gasket in the whole engine. I used to rebuild all the pumps for them. It was an oil pump, and then they called it an air separator. It actually had an air separator pump on the back of the oil pump. And then the water pump was on the side of the engine also, and it was all compacted real tight to the engine. Yep. And it was driven by a belt drive off the front of the engine. It was all enclosed, and that part of the engine just tucked up right to the driver's seat, the back of the driver's seat, and then the transaxle mounted to the back of the engine. And so the engine had to be very strong because it was actually part of the suspension, or part of the frame, however you want to, you know, say it. But yeah, that was critical. So we had to deal with that with the Buick V6 because we mounted it the same way. We set up the Buick V6, and the Ford engineers had a lot to do with this, where it would bolt into a Lola like a Cosworth, or, you know, everything had to work the same. The pumps were on the side the same, and, you know, we did really good with that. And then after the Indy car, which, you know, I loved, I really didn't want to leave Indy, but Kenny Bernstein, they sent me a set of heads for the Winston, back then it was Winston Cup, NASCAR Cup. He sent me a set of heads. It was, back then it was an 867 Pontiac. They were Chevrolet, you know, GM. Yep. It was a Quaker State Buick. And I ported them in my garage in Indy, at my house. And just there again, I'd never seen those set of those heads in my life. And they were making about 640 horsepower back, you know. Yep. That was a good engine. Some were 620, 30, you know. 640 was like a qualifier. And so I built them and then I didn't have a way to do the valve job because I had sold all of that equipment, and all I could do is grind. So I ported them, and then I went to Charlotte and delivered the heads and stayed there for a while. And they built the engine, dynoed it, and made 660, and they just dropped their head because, you know, in NASCAR you make onesies and twosies, and that thing made 660, and you know, I thought, okay, you know, wasn't a big deal to me, but 660, you know, I'm used to a lot more horsepower than that in a sprint car, and stuff like that. But shoot, the Buick Indy car made, you know, right at 900, and they were just flat fiberglass. You know, how do you do that? And because they knew I'd never seen that head before. But I guess learning by doing and a lot of luck, you know, because I could have failed just as easy. And then, like Kenny Bernstein said, "See you later, bye." You know, thanks for trying. But then he wanted to hire me, and so I moved the family to Charlotte, and that was hard, you know, because we really loved it in Indianapolis. You know, you deal with the snow, you just get used to it, you know. But we really loved it there because being in Phoenix, you know, you don't have 4 seasons. You got, you know, desert and smog basically, and a lot of traffic. So hated to move, but we did. And then something bad happened. Buick got out of NASCAR. And I moved. Okay, I did the IndyCar for the '89 season. For the Buick V6, and then at the end of the season, you know, I did that set of heads, and we moved to Charlotte, and then everything was going along good. Ricky Rudd was the driver at that time, and he's a great guy. He's actually a friend. Just to change the subject a little bit, Ricky, you know, was a go-kart racer for years, and my son races road racing go-karts, and we would build our own karts. And I was a dealer, and I actually built a go-kart for Ricky Rudd and Lake Speed and many others. Ricky and Lake, they're great people. We sat together at the banquet. At the end of the year, there'd be a banquet for the karting. My son won the championship, and I think Ricky was second, and Lake was there, and it was fun. And my son got a $1,000 check for winning championship. He won 2 that year. He's really good. He worked for me too through all the Ultra Pro machining years. We haven't got to that yet.
I know. We've only been talking for 48 minutes. That's all.
Yeah, and we haven't even got to the C3 head that we did. This is just a little of my career, which, you know, I'm missing a lot, I'm sure, but give you some highlights.
Let me interrupt you quick. So, Lake Speed Jr. said to say hi. I talked to him today.
Oh, good.
And
good. Hi, Lake.
And Matt Biederman. You know who I mean?
Oh, yeah.
He texted me yesterday and said, "Make sure you tell Don I said hi," and I didn't want to forget. I had it written down. So
yeah, MBE, Matt Biederman. Yeah, friendly competitor.
Love it, man.
But after, I was working for Kenny Bernstein at Quaker State Buick, and Buick pulling out of NASCAR. You know, and Kenny was switching to Ford, and here I am. I just moved down. This was after the 1990 season. Oh, another thing that we did real good. we won, when I was with Kenny, we won North Wilkesboro. We were on the pole at Charlotte with those, those heads that I was talking about. Ricky just raved about that engine. He hated to put the race engine in. There was just something about that thing. But let's see, after the 1990 or 91 season, Buick was getting out.
Okay.
And everybody in the engine shop was out of a job. And I asked if I could, do track tuning or something, but, because golly, I moved down here for this deal.
Well, yeah.
And no. And so.
Now, did Kenny tell you this, or just Buick?
No, you don't talk to the boss that much.
Okay.
It was through the secretary, Libby, who was she's great. She ended up working for Robert Yates.
Okay.
For years. And I worked with her when she worked for Robert. We haven't got to that yet. But we were all out of a job.
Wow.
So here, what do I do? So we built a 16 by 40 barn at the house, concrete floor with a loft.
Okay.
And a garage door and a side door. And wired it. And then I wired it for, I bought a milling machine, Bridgeport type. It was actually an Index. And then I had bought that. No, I bought that. Yeah. And then I brought a lathe with me from Phoenix. I sold that's the only thing I kept. I actually sold it to somebody in Chicago, and he never paid me. So I had to rent a Ryder truck with a lift gate.
Yeah.
And I had to pick that thing up from Chicago. Golly. But I did. And anyway, I had that there, and it was a real good one. Had collet set up, Harding's collet, 3-jaw and 4-jaw, and steady rest. It's real good lathe. But so I had that, and I always kept my flow bench, my Superflow 600 that I actually bought in 1985, and 85, 86. So I had it a long time. So that's what I had. And I had my grinders and, carbides and cartridge rolls. And we borrowed the money from my wife's parents. He's the farmer in Kansas.
Okay. Yep.
And we borrowed the money from them to build the barn. And, started with nothing. I had too much pride to take unemployment after being, laid off at Kenny Bernstein's Quaker State Buick deal. I just had too much pride to do it. So, boy, I sold my gun collection. I remember to pay the electric bill one time. Wow. That's how, and then you're cut off from health insurance.
Sure.
And they tell you, well, you can do the Cobra deal where you pay it yourself. Well, how are you going to pay it with no money?
Right.
Because we spent a lot of money to move here in Charlotte. And we bought a home at that time. It's about 3,000 square foot. This will drive people crazy. 3,000 square feet. It's they call it a split level. It's got a basement, real big living area.
Yep.
It's got an upstairs and then a main level.
Okay.
And the main level, everything's concrete on the main level. The upstairs is wood floors. But 2-car garage on 4 acres for $159,000. Can you imagine?
No.
it's 700,000 a day here.
Easy.
This area we're in, land is they've sold land for 100,000 an acre. They're building all kind of. We're in the country,
yep.
You know, in the county. In fact, Eric Jones, the NASCAR driver, lives on the other side of the pond from us. He owns the pond.
Okay.
But yeah, he's got he calls it his farm. But he's a real nice guy. So
wow.
That's how we got here. And then I started hand porting. I got introduced to the Top Fuel Harley guys.
Okay.
And I started hand porting cast heads for the Top Fuel Nitro Harley guys. And that was, you know, we're going back to 1990. And, you know, Jim McClure, who a lot of people may rest in peace, he was Jim and Phyllis, his wife. Wonderful, wonderful people. He was my very first customer, and I did, you know, cast heads for him, and then between Jim and me, we developed a 4-valve head, that. I mean, for Top Fuel Nitro,
yeah.
And it was based off the Rivera head, and I don't know why I'm having brain fade. I'll think of his name, but he ended up working for me, but at the time he didn't. He might. Hopefully, he's listening. Jim. I don't know. I'll think of it later.
It'll come to you.
But he machined what we called a skull cap, and we put on that head. It was a steel insert that pressed into the head, and then I did the valve job in it. You know, the guides were in the head, but
yeah.
the seat machining was in the stainless steel. I can't remember the exact material, but it was a high-end steel.
Yeah.
To seal the deck, because the cast head just wouldn't hold up that well. So that worked real well, and then I ended up doing a billet head, a 4-valve billet head for Jim, where it was proprietary just to him, and he sold a lot of them, and they ran good. He ran in the back. We're going back in the early 90s, in the sixes, mid low sixes, and he ran 240. Those motorcycles will run 240 naturally aspirated on nitro. It's amazing, and still today.
Big balls.
Some of the guys will run blower bikes today, and there's a few. And the quickest ET has been 6:02. And I know guys have been over 240, but you got to get everything right. There's only 2 cylinders, and you got to keep both candles lit, so to speak. Each head has dual plug. On the 4-valve, 3 plugs in it. There was room in the center and room on each side. We engineered 3 spark plugs in each head for 1 cylinder per cylinder. It's pretty cool, and that helped keep it lit, because you're putting so much fuel in those things. It's just incredible. But then from the barn, I found a building to rent.
Okay. And
somehow I maintained my credit and able to purchase things, because if you're late on anything, you've had it. So I was able to rent a building. It was about $3,000 a month, and it was 8,300 square feet. Real nice building, only 2 miles from the house.
Nice.
And I, of course, I missed a bunch of manual work I did here at the barn to make, to actually have money to be able to do things.
Okay. Yep.
So, I worked hard hand porting heads and doing everything I could to keep the family alive. And
right.
then a friendly bank financed a $200,000 CNC machine for me back in the early 90s, 5-axis. And which, sounds crazy, but I told him the story of my history and what I wanted to do. And, back then, there was hardly anybody doing this. Kenny Weld was the very first one to do it. And he actually modified a knee machine, a regular Bridgeport type machine, when he first did it. And I had this thing was it was 60 by 30. And I had a tilting rotary table system in it, and still have it today, and it still runs great. But it was $200,000, and got it in, and I knew I had to digitize, so I got a hold of Renishaw, and they flew somebody in from England, and he brought his Renishaw probe, and it was something new, and we set it up. I put a head that I had done a model port on in the fixture in the machine, and I could move the 5-axis around, and he started. Okay, we probed the dowel first.
Yep.
The dowel of the head, which you have to have a datum point.
Okay. And
then he said, well, we can only do a YZ or an XZ plane. I said, well, you can't digitize a head like that. You got to do it circular, or you're going to have a mess. You'd be moving it so many times to get around the short turn, and etc. So he went in there and he got this thing going, and I said, what am I going to do with that? And then he kind of fumbled, and I got to tell you a story before that. We were in there and looking and trying to get things in the right location, because you got to move everything manually to get it in the right position. And he looked at me. We were both heads in the machine. He said, do you have a torch? And I'm thinking, what do you need a torch for? I thought to myself. And I said, well, I have a propane torch and I have an oxygen acetylene set up.
Flashlight. No,
a torch. I said, a light. I said, oh, you want a flashlight? Oh, yes. That's what they call a flashlight in England, a torch. I had no clue. That was pretty funny, So I got him a flashlight, and it's amazing I can remember all these things. But then we're in there, and then he gets it going, and that it was a YZ plane, and I'm thinking, oh man, I got to figure this thing out. So we went through that for a while. I said, can I just take this thing over and you just watch me? And what I did, I got my datum point, I digitized the dowel, and then I went over, I set it up to do a valve seat. So I moved the machine in X and Y and Z, and I had the right, it was a forward intake. Back then it was the C3, so it was 7.5 degrees.
Yep.
I had it at, and I set it up toward the top of the valve seat. And the way that the software was, this was all run by a computer. It took over the CNC machine, and it actually turned it into a coordinate measuring machine, and it fed you back ASCII data, which is X, Y, and Z, and which is extremely important, having that data. So it would start always start in a Y direction and go counterclockwise. So I set it up to do one line, and it would stop. When it was done, it would stop where it started. I said, okay, David, that was his name. I'm going to go in the computer and drop it 25,000. And I did another line. And then David, I'm going to do it again. I did another line. And then I kept doing that, going back in the computer and telling it to do this until the seat was done. And then I said, okay, now we got our valve seat. And I'm going to take this. I bought Mastercam, and Andy Holden trained me on Mastercam. I got to tell you a story real quick about the computer.
Okay.
I ordered a computer. Yeah, we're talking early 90s here.
Yeah.
And I did a bunch of research. And back then, I mean, if you wanted any kind of a hot rod computer, you had to do it, online.
Okay.
Mail order, they called it. And so some people that know computers will understand this lingo, but I ordered an Isha motherboard, 486 DX2. I mean, we're talking early 90s here. That was the hot rod motherboard back then. And then I ordered the best video card I could find and a large hard drive. And I think the biggest you could get back then was maybe 500 megabyte.
Yeah.
Couldn't get anything big. And this was the real cool deal. I ordered a ViewSonic 17-inch monitor. And that monitor alone was $700. And in the whole computer system, I had about $4,300 in it. Everything was all the high end stuff was very expensive.
Oh, sure.
Back then.
Yeah.
Shoot. And anyway, got that computer, and it comes in, and I'm reading the instructions and everything, and it says boot it up. And I thought, oh no, what in the world does that mean? And I just looked around and I thought, where's the boot button? Because that's the first thing I'm supposed to do is boot the computer up.
Right.
And so I called Bob Heiner, a friend of mine who's a cylinder head person, and he told me, push the on button. That's how little I knew.
Wow.
And here I am with a CNC machine, and this was prior to me getting the CNC machine. It came in first.
Okay.
And then the Mastercam software, I got trained in it. So, okay, now I took that ASCII data from digitizing the seat and put it into Mastercam. And then what I did, I had to, in Mastercam, draw a line, a Z-drop line in between each Z-drop that I did. When I did each line at a time.
Yep.
Well, they were just in space. Each line was its own XYZs, but they were just in space. If you would have ran that program, it would run one line. So I had to add a line at each drop, and then I had to at the end go to the center of the seat, program that in Mastercam, and then have the tool come out, and then go to the next hole, the next seat.
Yeah.
And I also had to program it for the tool to come in and then at the right location and start the machining. So I had that program done. Then I'd go in Mastercam and I would tell it to move that program 4 times or 3 times, for 4 ports.
Sure.
And there I had my seats done. So then I went to the bowl, and then I went, I had to rotate the head around to get at the bottom of the bowl and around the guide and more of the short turn. And then I would go to set up the intake runner, and I would get the 5-axis movement in the A and B and as close as I could to. I would actually take the probe down in there. Okay, I'm going to shank here. I'm going to shank there. I need to move my B axis a little more, and I would set it up to get the most information I could without shanking out. Now, to protect myself from the tool shanking, the probe was 20 thousandths. The shank of the probe was 20 thousandths longer than the shank of my tool. So I purposely had that bigger, because then if I shanked out and I missed it, I wouldn't destroy a head or a rotary system. When you shank, it's, you can break a tool instantly. So I built in the protection for myself. And so that was kind of a helpful deal to make it easier. And then I'd have the intake port, and I'd do the same thing for the exhaust, and then the combustion chamber. The chamber was probably the hardest to do, because especially when I got into canted valve stuff, because of the, that was a little tougher than the C3. The first one I did was actually for Mike Kennedy in the early 90s, and he did Petty. He did some engines for him. He did development, and he was my very first customer. And he built the engine that Richard Petty won the 200th race in. Wow. He actually built that engine.
Wow.
For Richard Petty's 200th, and he sold his engine shop to Andy Durham, okay, who's a customer. He has Mike's shop now, and Andy builds dirt late model engines. He worked at Roush Yates for a while. He's a real good engine builder. I deal with so many good engine builders: Bill Sleeper, Pro Power, Jack Cornett, Jay Dickens, Larry Clark. I'm getting in circles here, but this is kind of a neat story. Scott Bloomquist, who everybody's heard of, the famous dirt late model racer, who's a great guy. I got to stay at his house one time. Met his dad, who builds airplanes from scratch. But Scott came by the Ultra Pro machining in '98 and heard about me and wanted me to do heads. And of course, Scott gets everything for free because of who he is. And I said, I can't do, I don't do that for anybody, Scott. And he said, okay. And so I, charged him, and he kept track of that first set of heads I did for him. And we're going to get into what type of head it was. It was actually the C3H. And he said, I kept track of that. He called me at the end of the season. And Larry Clark built the engines, custom race engines.
Okay. And
he won over $300,000 with that set of heads.
Wow.
That's how good Scott is, And that was just one engine, and he had others. So, but I really appreciated that call. He's a great guy. And Jack Cornette did his engines for years and years and years. And then and Larry did them for a long time. And I actually don't know who's doing them today. It was Larry, but Larry has retired.
Yes.
So I'm not sure. I'll have to call Scott. But I got off track.
That's all
Get
right.
me back on track here, because it's just I think of things. You know, I've done so much. I'm not trying to brag.
No,
It's just,
dude, no,
you know, I'm just. One thing kind of leads to another. I get ahead of myself.
But let me ask you this. I got to interrupt you because this is like blowing me away. So what you're telling me, okay, Don, and then let's say 91, whatever, 90, 91, you have this CNC machine. The guy that sells it or the tech doesn't even know how to program the damn thing past 2-axis. You go ahead and set this thing up. You were like, what, one of the first guys to digitize and CNC heads?
This way, yeah.
Yeah.
Kenny Weld was the first. You know, he gets all the credit in the world.
Okay.
And then I might have been second. You know, but let's see. I might have been third. You know, but it was, you know, we all did what we did. You know, there was nothing out there, and you know, you had to learn it by yourself.
Yeah.
And Mike Chapman might have been second, but I can't. You know, everything was so close in there, and so. That was how Ultra Pro machining got going. Oh, and Renishaw appreciated that what I did for them so much. They gave me the system, and it was like a $30,000 system.
Wow!
They gave it to me, and in 1994 they talked Fadal into giving them a machine like mine.
Yeah.
And they had one of my heads set up at the PRI show, and I was there, and displaying, you know, the Renscan 200. They had it on display at PRI in '94, and that's where I met Steve Schmidt, a famous drag race engine builder, and back then Schmidt Ike built 10 to 12 of the Pro Stock cars that made the field. You know, they'd have that many engines in the field, and I started doing his heads. And David Spitzer, who worked for him, he and I worked together, and he knew exactly what I wanted for a model, and he had, you know, tremendous talent. And I digitized the head, like, you know, like I was telling you.
Yeah.
And one line at a time, and a big block Chevy, and they have 2 intake ports. So, you know, it took quite a long time. And it was the Brodex Pontiac head that I did for him, and that's what was legal for Pro Stock back then. But I enjoyed working with Steve and Dale Ike, great guy, and David Spitzer. Give him all the credit in the world. And so, yeah, I remember going to the airport a lot and taking heads to Steve. I'd be there lifting big block heads on the machine at 2 a.m, and they were so heavy, and the machine's pretty high.
Yeah.
I had to stand on it. I was stupid, but I stood on a chair, you know, a little chair.
Yeah.
And one time I almost went backwards. Oh my goodness. I'm thinking I'm dead, you know, because the big block Chevy. But it was so hard, to lift way up there. And boy, after that, I didn't use the chair.
Okay.
I somehow got them up there, but because I didn't want to ding the dowels or nothing, I wanted to lay them flat down. Because all my reference point was deck and dowels. That's how I referenced everything off of. But back to Renishaw, I told them what we need is an automatic Z-drop program in the software, where if I tell it to start at this X, Y, Z area, plane, whatever you want to call it, and I want it to finish at this Z plane. And we got that thing to automatically do it. They did it in England. But then I could set up that deal and I could do a whole runner, that one section of the runner or the whole seat. And I just tell it to go. I'd tell it what to do in X, Y, and Z. It would go there. It would just automatically, whoop, there I am. And then I'd push the go button and it would go in the Y plane always and counterclockwise. Then it would stop and then automatically go down.
Yeah.
And then I had my Z-drop lines. I didn't have to put them in anymore. They were in the ASCII data. So that made my day. That speeded things up tremendously. So okay, we're through that.
Yep.
Then people are hearing about me in NASCAR. So I hired Dave Sabatino, who worked for me for maybe a year, and he was my only employee. He was my very first employee at Ultra Pro Machining, unless you want to count my son and my wife. My wife did all the books all along. Even today, she does all the QuickBooks, and we work with a real good accountant here in Charlotte, Higgins, and they're great.
So the NASCAR guys come to you with what, the C3 head stuff, or?
Yeah, it was the C3.
Okay.
And this would have been in '94.
Yep.
With the C3, and it's kind of funny. Stavola Brothers was one of the places I went to for a job. Oh, I didn't get to the story after I was laid off. After I was laid off, I tried to go to these teams and get hired.
Yeah.
But when you're a former chief engine builder, they're not going to hire you. They want to know my background. I told them cylinder heads and engine building and all this stuff and where I worked. And I got turned down at Stavola Brothers and others, and I just gave up. I said, I got to do something on my own here. And that's how Ultra Pro started in the barn. Me hand porting heads, Harley heads, and some V8s, and whatever I could get,
Yeah.
And then that went on for, almost 4 years. And then got 3 years. Yeah, 3 years. And then got the machine and got the Renishaw and the Mastercam, and then I was able to do it. And Mike Kennedy, I'll get back to that. He was my very first customer. It was for Richard Petty, and the first program I did, I worked 48 hours straight. I did not go home. I slept on the concrete floor if I got tired. I just put a paper towel under my head. I didn't change clothes. I mean, it sounds gross, but I mean, I was determined, because if I laid down, it might have been for a half hour, at a time. 48 hours. And then I went home for 10 hours and got freshened, and then I worked 72 hours straight to finish it. And just, that's just the drive I had, because I was scared to death. first of all,
Well, yeah.
I got to make this work. I'm in debt, and all this. And so I got, heads done. And then for Mike, and then I got into the Ford. And that was my bread and butter. That I developed that C3 head,
Yep.
our own ports and different types. Dave Sabatino did a port, and he had Alan Kowicki run it. And then did other ports, and ended up doing heads for who would have been the first ones. Well, Stavola Brothers were early on. Then Robert Yates and Penske. Jasper Engines were a little later. When after they became a NASCAR team, they had their own engine shop.
Okay. Yep.
And then Junior Johnson. Tell you a little story about Junior. I delivered his first set of heads, and I couldn't believe it, but I got to sit across the desk from Junior at his office. He was in the new part that he built down the hill, they called it.
Okay.
That's where his other team, the team's the car shop was, and one of his engine shops. And I did heads for the team up the hill behind his house. Well, at that time, I believe he was divorced from Flossie, and so Flossie lived there. But there were Junior's original, shop where he did the cars and the engines. Yep. Was behind the house, and that's who I did the engine or the heads for. And Junior said, "Whatever you do, don't you even talk to these boys down here." He said, "You only work with the team up there." And he made sure I understood it. He wanted them to compete against each other.
Both of his teams, you're saying?
Yeah, he didn't want them to know what the other one was doing. He wanted to, made the best man win.
Yeah.
That's how Junior wanted to do it. They don't do that today. None of the teams do that today. But he wanted a competitive situation going on. And later on, when I was doing stuff for him, that all changed, as the years went by. And then I was doing the Ford restrictor plate manifold. Yep. And I was, with that machine I had, I could, what we call a bathtub, I cut the manifold on the front and the rear out 29 degrees. It was 29, 30 degrees, way out. I mean, and then I'd cut the plenum, and the thing was just a monster. And what that gave you in a restrictor plate engine is, there's just no air.
Right.
And back then they were even in my day when I was with Kenny Bernstein, we were playing with the tubes in the intake runner, in the plenum, tubes in the plenum, and you experimented with shapes, and I was on the manual lathe all the time, designing new shapes, and venturis and contours and tapers, and trying everything. And then actually Keith Thornton, I give him a shout out. Back in probably 1990, he had the best Chevrolet engine, and he figured out how to do it and to be within the rules. What some guys were doing, and I never cheated, but it was 1990. Most of the teams, I'm not saying Keith did this,
yeah,
but a lot of the teams, and I'm not going to mention names, but they know who they were. They set it up so all that stuff I'm talking about that's in the manifold would pull itself up to the restrictor plate, and that was worth about a dozen horsepower, and that's a ton in a plate motor, you know. And those guys all were, you know, qualified up front. And I'm thinking, man, we have a good engine. What the heck's going on here? And then they all got busted, and they had to take all that stuff out, but they didn't make them like go to the back of the field. And the guys that didn't cheat were fast. Yeah. You know, because the big teams that were doing what they were doing, they didn't have the development in the legal stuff. They were thought that, man, we got this deal dialed in. You know, the NASCAR will never catch us. But what happened, and this is how everybody gets caught in NASCAR: cheating. One employee that knows about it, he goes to another team. Yeah. He tells the chief engine builder, he tells the owner or the crew chief. They go to NASCAR, busted. That's how it happens. Yep. It's NASCAR hasn't caught that many people over the years. It's people tattletaling is what's done it. Because the guys are really smart. I mean, you know, you're talking about some smart people in NASCAR. Now today everything's so specced out, you can't do any of that stuff. It's totally changed. But my day, you know, they didn't know how to check this stuff. And now, shoot, I remember they hired Gary Nelson, who was one of the best at, you know, figuring things out of what to do to go faster, and they hired him. And so get me back on track. Okay, here we go. So you know what it is? It's just like we just start talking and it just starts coming out. I mean, there is no. Yeah, it just naturally comes out, I think. Luckily, you know, at almost 76, I guess we could take a break of, and I can tell you what I've been through. Last Halloween, I had quadruple heart bypass and a heart valve replaced, a pig valve they put in me, and which is fitting because of all the top fuel nitro Harley heads I've done. So that's perfect. I'm really one of the guys now, but it's kind of funny. But I had 2 strokes during that, and one affected my peripheral vision, and the other one affected, I would like be looking at a picture on a wall, and if my eyeballs moved, the picture would move. It'd be somewhere else. Or if I looked at my wife, and I looked to the left, and or right, it would be moved, and then that image would be there for a little while, and then if I locked down another image, it would do the same thing, and that went on. I was in the hospital 8 days with a heart surgery, and then 8 more days at home. And I was watching a NASCAR race, a road race, and my eyes moved, and they were off the racetrack. The whole group of cars were off the racetrack. Wow. Isn't that weird? It is weird. And it lasted about 8 days, and then I haven't had it since. It's amazing. The doctor said your brain is an amazing thing. It will heal itself. So yeah, I went through that, and then they overdosed me with warfarin. Yep. And I was bruised everywhere. I was wearing a defib vest after the heart surgery, as just to be, you know, cautious. I bruised everywhere that harness was. And finally they got me in the Coumadin clinic, and I checked 14.6, which maxed the hospital's reading out. So I was 14.6 plus, and I was supposed to be
2 to 3.
1, 2, 3. Yeah, 2 to 3 when you're on warfarin.
Yes. Wow.
So I was bleeding out internally. They told me to eat broccoli when I went home. I did. I threw up instantly, and I never throw up. My body didn't want to have to work because I was bleeding internally and didn't know it. And I woke up at 1 in the morning, paralyzed from the waist down. Totally paralyzed. I worked my way down to the floor. I woke up because I had to go to the restroom.
Yeah.
So I thought, okay, I'll crawl to the restroom. I couldn't even crawl. My wife called 911, and the fire department came first, and they got me up in a chair. And during this time, my eyes closed, and I could not open them. So I was dying. I was, that's part of dying.
Yeah.
And I was bleeding out, they call it, and internally. And so the ambulance came. I tried to open my eyes. My brain was still good. Tried to open my eyes, and I couldn't. When I was in the ambulance, I wanted to see inside of it. I'd never been in one, and I couldn't open my eyes. And the next thing I remember, I don't remember being checked in or nothing. Next thing I remember is a doctor asking me permission to give me blood. And they gave me 2 units to start with.
Yep.
And then they did more blood testing. And then they told me they need to give me more. And they gave me another unit. And then I was in the hospital 11 days with that. And I had to learn how to walk again. I could not, being paralyzed, I had to walk with a walker. And they taught me how to do that. And my daughter bought me one for the house. And so I was on a walker for quite a while. Then they wanted me to have in-home therapy, so a guy would come in, just have me walk around. And then I graduated to a cane, and then I graduated to walking on my own, but all this took time. I was hurting. And then I learned how to climb stairs. And I'm going to go back to the heart surgery. Dr. Takla, who works out of Cabarrus Atrium,
okay,
the most wonderful heart surgeon. He's amazing. The nurses would keep asking me, "What's your pain level, 0 to 10?" And I keep saying 0, and they'd look at me. "No, we need to give you Oxycontin." No. And explain what I went through, because you can do better than me. What heart surgery is, how they split you down. They split your rib cage
right
and then spread you apart.
They cut you through the sternum with a saw called median sternotomy. They just go zzz, cut it right down. Then you take a rib spreader and you kind of pull open with just to spread it open, the tissue, spread it open. Then you take an electrocautery, then you just burn down through the tissue until you come to the pericardium. Now, in your case, what they did is they took one of the arteries. We're getting kind of off topic, but I love this stuff too. But they took the lima, the internal mammary artery from your left side. They harvest that from the chest wall and bring it down as a pedicle. That's one of your bypass grafts. The other ones come from your leg. So once they open up that chest all the way, they put a rib retractor in there, turn a crank, and it just opens up your chest about this far. So now you can cut down to the heart, which is in the sac called the pericardium. You just grab a pair of forceps, the assistant, usually me and the surgeon, and just cut a hole in the pericardium. Pericardial fluid drains out, maybe, just depends on how much is in there. Normally, there's about a shot glass of 30 cc's, because the heart can't work against tissue. It works underwater, so to speak, or under fluid, because it's less friction. So it operates in a fluid bag, a bag of fluid called pericardial fluid. They drain that out. then they cut the pericardium open, and then they sew it to the chest wall so it's open, and then the heart's right here. Everyone thinks the heart's to the left side. It's not. It's right in the center of the chest. But it's funny that you said that, because I was just showing the guys here. I have a pericardial valve I'm going to open up on one of my one of my episodes, and you have a pig valve. So in theory, once you get past the post-operative phase, you don't need to be on Coumadin usually, unless you have AFib or a different,
well, because I had the stroke, they wanted to.
Yep.
Boy, that's the worst thing that ever happened to me in my life.
It is.
Being overdosed with that. Everybody out there, if they ever say Coumadin or warfarin, beware.
It's rat poison.
And that's why I brought that up, because I almost died. I'm lucky. The doctors in the hospital said, "I can't believe you're alive." And neurologists I've seen, they can't believe I'm alive, what I went through.
But did you know it was rat poison to begin with?
Well, one of the doctors told me that's actually rat poison. That's what they kill rats with, and that you've seen episodes on TV where people put it into people's food and try to kill them.
Sure.
I did not know warfarin. See, all I heard was Coumadin.
Right.
They never brought up the word warfarin. So I thought it was a regular prescription.
Right.
Okay. And then they give me more. First they gave me 2.5 milligrams.
Yep.
And then they gave me 5 additional. Is that crazy?
Yeah, what I'll tell you, and we had talked about this before, and I don't like to say things like this, but between me, you, and there's 65 people watching this. I mean, in theory, that's a lawsuit, because you can't.
Oh yeah.
You can't just give someone Coumadin and say, "Yeah, take 5 milligrams every day. See you in the morning," or whatever in a week. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
It has to be monitored at least until you get onto some kind of regimen where, he's pretty stable at 2.5 every day, or 2.5 one day, 5 the day after, whatever. But we had talked about this before about you're not that kind of guy. You know what I mean?
No, that's the problem. Well, a lot of people would.
Sure, they would.
But, it might kill me, because, the stress that would be involved.
Yep.
In something like that.
Yep.
And, it's just not worth it.
God's looking out for you, Don. That's why you're here today, talking right now, and back to certain heads. So,
yeah.
And he's walking. You do everything now. Your vision's getting better.
Yeah, my vision is getting better. I got a shot in my eye Thursday.
Yep.
And it's doing better. Yeah, it's not where it needs to be.
Right.
I can't really, if I had to see out of that eye, there's no way.
Okay.
But I'm doing better.
So keep them in your prayers, guys.
I guess we could. I don't know. You want to get back to the C3, or what do you want to do?
Let's do the C3s. Right now, here's where we're at. I mean, we're at 1 hour and 43 minutes. I said to my wife, who just was.
Oh wow, we could do another 2 hours. We could do an hour on the C3, let alone the D3.
Here's what I'm wondering: if we don't finish up now, because this is the thing, you're not some guy that started working at an ice cream stand and made Eskimo pies. Your history is so extensive, to try to cover it in this short period of time, it's tough. And I know you had said that you wanted to get your gang, so to speak, all the guys that on here, but you just didn't have a chance, because we kind of only had about 24 hours the way it all worked out. So here's what I'm thinking. I think we should just hold it and start again on the C3. See, we have your history.
Yeah, now you have my history and, what I've gone through health-wise recently.
Yep.
And
I know you're tired.
But I'm still able to work every day. So, and I can still grind. I just got done with an upgrade on a Pro Fuel Harley.
Yep.
Where I had to do all the ports, because I had done an upgrade on it, CNC.
Yes.
But the equipment's in Martinsville, and just now got power to it. I'll get into that in the next deal.
So,
all the all the equipment's been, the CNC equipment. I have manual stuff here at my house.
Okay.
And you know, on the flow bench and all that, and the SERDI, but all the CNCs are up at Martinsville. And the reason for the move is the building. I sold my building in '99. I bought another building. I was renting.
Yep.
Originally, you know, going back in the early '90s, and then in '99 I bought a building. It was 4 acres, 24,000 square feet. So, and I hired a carpenter, and it was really nice. I mean, we had a conference room, a break room. You know, everybody had their own grinding rooms in that shop. You know, offices up front for my wife, and her name's Eileen. And then, you know, a great shop, all the CNC machines. We had Jim Taylor was our fabricator and welder. An area for him. He's a great fabricator. He works at Pro Motor today. He's got a nice family, and you know, had a lot of great employees. Mike Lancy worked for us originally at the old shop, the original shop, back in '97. Just hired him on the phone. He lived in Long Island, and I like, you know, and he's a wonderful person, very talented, and we did all the petty heads, you know, going back a long time. We ended up, Rick Mann ended up being the chief engine builder for Richard Petty, and he wanted me to do a certain heads for him. I'm not going to tell you how unique they are because I can't give away any proprietary stuff, but it was kind of a neat deal. He wanted just to be totally private. And so I did heads for him, and then Mike Lancy did the finish work. I did all the, you know, the CNC stuff, and then I would call Rick and, how's it going? You want us to develop anything else? So we would develop new stuff, and he would say, man, I can't believe it, but these engines all repeat 1 to 2 horsepower, you know, and that says a lot for, you know, Mike's finish work, because he would do the SERDI and the final blending, and so that's good. And then Dave Sabatino, he went on to work for Alan Kowicki.
Okay.
He left us. He just likes working for teams, you know, and so, you know, I've had a lot of employees that have gone to NASCAR teams over the years. It made it kind of tough. Andy Riffle was probably one of my favorites because he was about 19 years old. Bob Riffle, a great engine builder. He worked for Jack Roush, and I'll get into that story with him when we get into the C3s. But Bob knew me, and he trusted me, because, you know, if you give your son to somebody, you know, they can get ruined in this NASCAR world. It's a tough world. So he asked me if I'd hire him, and I did. And it's one of the best things I ever did. And Andy knew nothing. You know, basically, you know, we went from the micrometer to the caliper to, you know, SERDI seats, or putting guides in, honing guides, installing seats, you know, just everything from start to finish. And very talented, very intelligent, and you couldn't find a nicer person. And he trained him to run the Bostomatic 505 port heads, you know, on the CNC machine, and plus, you know, finished heads. And then he lived way north on 77, and we were in Charlotte, and that drive just got to him, and
Yep.
he got a job at Dale Earnhardt Incorporated, and which, you know, I've never gotten mad if any employee has told me they're going to leave, and I just ask them when they need to leave. You know, if they gave a notice, gave me a notice, you know, would give me
Sure.
time. Some would, some had to take that job, you know, and I was always cordial about it because, you know, it's just part of business. So, and he was fortunate that when DEI merged the engine shop with Richard Childress, that he got to go up there, and he's still there. And that, you know, and he started at my shop. I'm kind of proud of this. From, you know, basically his dad, you know, wanting me to train him.
Yep.
And so I think that I'm proud of that. And there's been many others that I've done the same thing with, especially in the CNC side, training them, you know, from being a carpenter to being a CNC machinist. With my, you know, my vocational teaching, that kind of helped me, you know, being patient and everything, because, you know, a person's going to make mistakes. They do the best they can. I make mistakes. And just a little word to the wise out there, if you're doing something and somebody comes up to you and interrupts you, stop what you're doing, because that's when mistakes are made. I found that the hard way many times, because you know, you want to keep working, and that's when you're going to mess up, when somebody distracts you. So that's why I had the individual grinding rooms for the guys. You know, they could set them up their own way, and you know, when we get into the C3 and D3, I'll bring up other gentlemen that have worked for me. Andy Magnuson, you know, he's really talented, and Lou Patain's son, he worked for me. Lou, when I did the Dodge heads, we haven't got, that's way far, we got to get into, but I did Everham's heads, and Lou Patain, who actually worked for me, believe it or not, in my engine at Thunder Racing in Phoenix. He worked for me there, and then he got Dodge dealerships, and then from there he graduated to working for Dodge in the racing division, and then he worked for Everham, and then he asked me about hiring his son, and he's very talented. His son, he played bass guitar too, but I got off track again. There's so many things that I could talk about, but that I thought I'd bring those people up because they're, you know, part of Ultra Pro, and you know, Robert Yates, what a wonderful person. They called us when we get into the C3 deal, and then eventually the D3, the C3, we were called like Yates North, because you know, we did all their heads for years and years and years. Dale Jarrett won the championship in '99 with, you know, C3 and Ultra Pro machined heads. All their ports were proprietary. Everything for Robert Yates was proprietary, and it's still in the closet, so to speak, today. You know, nobody's ever seen that stuff. None of the other teams ever got anything that was even close to what they had. I made sure of that. So, and yeah, we'll get into Ken Black and KB Racing, and, you know, Greg Anderson's Pro Stock. We started doing their stuff thanks to Joe Hornick back in 2002. Joe worked with Greg, and Joe had already worked with me on a project for Joe Gertie, and it was Gertie, and so we ended up doing a Ford and they put it on a Chevy block. I had to move the bolt pattern and the guide bores and all that to make a Ford fit on a Chevy block. But that's another story. There's so many things. It just I was just rambling here. I was the first one to fully CNC a one-piece manifold back in '97. Did it for Petty, and after that, I was first one to do a Billet two-piece manifold, and then I gave that technology to Dart and Elderbrock. Because making billet manifolds, it's very expensive and very hard to do. And, doing one style was enough, but, to do all the different styles. And now today, Elderbrock doesn't hardly have a two-piece manifold. It's a shame, things have changed there. I'll get into a story where Vic Elderbrock visited my shop for quite a while. Jack Rouse visited me for 2 hours at the new building that was 24,000 square feet, and a lot of different people. Robert Yates all the time, Doug Yates a lot, and so I don't know where you want to end it. I could go on for hours, but I don't know if people want to, stay up. It's almost 2 hours now, but it's easy for me. Fortunately, at the age of 76, still able to remember all this stuff, and we could, start at the C3 at Ultra Pro Machining.
Yep.
It started at the original building that I rented, and I had one machine, and I bought a DCM so I could deck heads. I had a manual lathe and a milling machine, like a Bridgeport.
Yeah.
That's what I had when I started, and then I graduated and ended up with 9 machines, $4 million later. And it's all paid for, fortunately, but that's how it progressed. But we can do the C3, then it would be the C3H.
Yep.
And I went to the foundry with Mose Nolan, wonderful, the greatest guy, engineer for Ford, and we rubbed cores. I made the core. We rubbed cores on the C3s, so they were more machinable for me.
Yep.
And for anybody else. We'd usually rub, 50 heads worth, and then when I was up there, I made the port plug for the C3H while I was up there, and then Mose worked and got the C3H casting, and I was using that for drag race and the dirt late model. That was Scott Bloomquist heads, and heads for Jack Cornett back then. Jack was, I guess, officially my first dirt late model customer.
Okay.
I met him at the PRI show, so he was because I really didn't have time. I was doing all that NASCAR work, and Steve Schmitz.
Yep.
And so he was my first dirt late model, and that's my main business now is dirt late model with Bill Sleeper and Josie, his wife, and John, Bill's brother.
Yep.
Pro Power. You got to give Bill a lot of credit because he's one of the few that actually goes to the racetrack, and boy, that's tough because he was doing it. He was doing the short course truck series, and dirt late model, and he'd go to all the big races and lash their valves, set their timing, tune their carburetor. Man, that's tough. I haven't talked to Bill. I haven't asked Bill if he's still doing that today, because that, you know, but hardly any of the engine builders do it because they can't, because they got to be there, you know, running their business. And,
Sure.
you know, they'll go to the big races, Eldora, etc. But, you know, it's a tough deal. And Andy Durham, you know, I think he used to do it. I don't know if he does anymore, but, man, you know, it's a hard life. It wears on you.
Don, here's what we're going to do, because I've been reading comments on the side. So here's what we should do, because I'm telling you, we could keep going, but I want to start with a fresh start so we can put some time into advertising, so to speak. Because I'm telling you, from us talking before and now tonight, I mean, there's definitely easy 2 or 3 parts to this or more. Plus the people that you know. I mean, we can record this history from all different angles. So let's do this. Let's quit now. It's 2 hours like we had talked about. So we're going to stop now. I'm going to give some shout outs and thank you guys for being here. Don Losito, thank you for taking time for DragBoss Garage and telling part 1 of your story to the subscribers in the world, because this is killer,
and they
man.
can all tell their friends to get on that link so they can see, you know, see this first session.
Yes.
Right.
And tell your friends too that they're
welcome. Get the link out there.
They can come on.
You know, I'm not getting anything from it. I'm just enjoying a little history here.
That's what I love.
And actually, I've just begun.
I know.
There's so much more to tell. I tell you.
That's why we got to do it in stages and in parts, because we don't want to miss stuff. There's so much, and I want to do it. Let's do that. We'll do it that way. So let me say thank you guys. Don't forget to like and subscribe and give the thumbs up and share this. Mike Lancy, thank you. Everybody else that's been here, I appreciate you being here. And we're going to end it right now. Just remember, you're always seeing and learning something new at DragBoss Garage. So you come back, because you're going to see and hear a lot more.